My mother always used to say that a shaved head was the best hairstyle for a girl. Clean, simple, easy to manage, and it keeps you from, attracting the wrong kind of attention from boys. As a child, my mother had very strict rules about my appearance. He always insisted that he had to keep his head shaved, no matter how much he wanted otherwise. She told me it was for my own good, but over time I realized that it was not a choice I had made, but something she imposed on me to maintain control over me. When I grew up, I tried to oppose their rules. The summer before I left for college, I got her to let me grow my hair, but the night before I left, while I was sleeping, she shaved it off again. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. I realized that no matter how much I tried to reason with her, she would never see me as an independent person. During my first day at college, she kept interfering in my life, making sure everyone saw me as special or different. I did it subtly, but enough to make people look at me strangely or talk about me behind my back. The situation became untenable when he began to mock me in public, manipulate my environment, and turn my university life into an extension of his control. It made me feel small, weak, and voiceless. Until one day I decided that I was no longer going to allow it. What happened from there changed my life forever. I gave up on the idea of having a mother, as such. The things that previously hurt me stopped affecting me. Late at night, my mother was sleeping in the big bed. When she went to bed, she left her hair spread out on the pillow, shiny in the dim light of the hallway. He had always felt superior to me, always with his impeccable hair, telling me that I needed nothing more than a shaved head. What if I lost it? The thought hit me hard. The idea of seeing her without her hair, without her shield, without her pride. My hand balled into a fist on the sheet. It wasn't just revenge, it was justice. I grabbed the scissors from my luggage and cut his hair. I opened my eyes in the dimness of the room, and for a moment, I stood still, my heart pounding in my ears. A dull hum filled my head. My fingers, still gripping the scissors, were sticky with strands of thick, silky hair. My breath caught in my throat as I looked at my mother's bed. Her dark curls were spread across the pillow, cascading around her face. Some strands dangled from my hands, and others floated on the floor like the remains of a silent battle. I did it. For a second, I felt a pang of panic. My mother was still sleeping, oblivious to what had happened. But not for long. I dropped the scissors and took a step back, feeling dizzy. The air in the room became suffocating. I looked at my hands as if they were someone else's. What had he just done? It had not been a momentary impulse. I had planned it without knowing it, with every humiliation, every cruel word, every night in which I wanted to disappear. Cutting his hair wasn't just revenge. It was to take away the control he always had over me. A choked sound escaped his throat as he turned in bed. My body tensed. I saw her blink slowly, her eyes still cloudy with sleep. Then, his hand lazily rose to his head. The stillness in the room was suddenly broken. A piercing screech rent the air. My mother sat up abruptly, raising both hands to her head as if she were searching for something that was no longer there. His breathing became erratic. His fingers tangled in uneven strands. What did you do to me? He jumped out of bed like a wounded animal, running towards the nearest mirror. I didn't move. I didn't try to escape. I knew this reaction would come, and part of me was ready to face it. His reflection showed the truth before he could fully process it. His hair, his pride, his glory, reduced to a shadow of what it once was. The fury on his face was something I had never seen before. He turned to me, eyes burning with anger, and advanced with heavy steps. You. His voice trembled. Chelsea, what did you do to me? I didn't answer. I didn't blink. Do you have any idea what you did? His voice broke into something between a scream and a sob. How dare you? Something inside me ignited. A fire I didn't know I had. How dare I? I repeated, feeling a strange calm creep over me. Mom, how dare you? His chest rose and fell violently. His hands were clenched into fists at the sides of his body. This is different, Chels. I did it for your good. No. My voice sounded firm, without trembling. You did it because you could. Because you enjoy seeing me suffer. You are ungrateful. He spat, taking a step towards me. I didn't move. You're right, I said softly. I don't thank you for anything. For a moment, his face contorted into something unrecognizable. Then, in a fit of rage, he slapped me. I expected it. But this time I didn't bow my head. The blow made me turn my face, but I didn't take a step back. "I'm going to destroy you for this," he said in a low, menacing voice. "I will take everything you have from you." I took a deep breath and blurted out the words before fear could stop me. "You can't take anything from me. You already took everything from me." His face went from anger to confusion. For the first time in my life, she was not in control of the situation. "I'm not going to stay here," I said. "You're never going to touch me again." I backed slowly toward the door, my heart pounding against my ribs. I grabbed my phone and my keys while still looking at her. "If you take one more step, I'll call the police." His expression changed. A flash of doubt crossed his gaze. I left the room and closed the door tightly. The early morning air hit my face as I walked down the stairs to the bedroom. My body was shaking, but not from fear, but from adrenaline. I didn't look back. I didn't have to do it. For the first time in my life I was in control. I ran without thinking, without feeling the weight of the cold air against my skin or hearing the echo of my steps on the wet pavement. I just wanted to get as far away as possible. The campus was quiet at that hour. Some lanterns flickered, casting long shadows on the deserted paths. My breathing was rapid and uncontrolled, and my hands were still shaking. I didn't have a plan. I had nowhere to go. My mother was still in the bedroom. Maybe, at that moment, I was destroying the little I had brought with me. Maybe I was calling my father so he could fix me. Or maybe I was sitting in the dark, planning how to make this my fault. It didn't matter. I wasn't going back. I pulled up next to a building with the lights on and checked my phone. 4:37 a.m. My heart was still hammering in my chest, but the fog in my head was beginning to clear. I had to think. And then, a name emerged in my mind. Professor Ellis. She had been the only one who, in the first days of class, had looked at me with real concern. Not with pity or morbid curiosity, like the others. During a session in which he talked about the importance of asking for help when college life became difficult, he gave me his contact, in case you ever needed him. I never used it. Until now. I took a deep breath and with my fingers still numb, wrote a message. "I'm sorry for the hour, but I need help. I can't go back to my dorm. It's an emergency." I hesitated for a second before hitting send. Wait. Every second felt eternal. And then the answer came. "Where are you?" A lump in my throat loosened a little. I sent him my location, and a few minutes later, I saw Professor Ellis appear in the distance, wearing a long coat over her pajamas and her hair in a messy bun. When he saw me, his expression went from concern to immediate recognition. "Chelsea," his voice was soft but firm. "Are you okay?" I wasn't, but I didn't know how to say it. She didn't wait for my answer. "Come," she said, gesturing for me to follow her. "Let's go to my office." I walked behind her, feeling the weight of the night on my shoulders. When we arrived at her office, the warmth of the small space made me realize how cold it was. I sat on the couch while she turned on a lamp and took off her coat. "Do you want water?" I nodded. I took small sips, feeling my body begin to calm down. Professor Ellis sat in front of me, with her hands crossed on her knees. He watched me patiently, giving me time. But I knew I had to speak. "My mother is here. On campus," I swallowed. "Not only that. He's been staying with me." I forced myself to continue. "He won't leave me alone. Control everything I do. He humiliates me in front of others. It doesn't let me breathe." Professor Ellis did not interrupt me. "And tonight," my voice broke, "I took revenge." She waited. I cut his hair while he was sleeping. For the first time in the entire conversation, the teacher blinked in surprise. He didn't judge me. He didn't call me crazy. Instead, his face hardened with something that almost looked like indignation. "Has he hurt you physically?" "Not in the way you might think." He leaned forward slightly. "Chelsea, what you describe is psychological, emotional abuse. And considering that she is invading your personal space here at the university, it can also be considered harassment." My fingers closed around the glass. "Harassment?" "Yes," he said seriously. "You have the right to be safe here. To be alone, if that's what you want." His words were a new language to me. I never thought I had the right to demand something like that. "I'm going to call the student support office," he continued. "And if you'll allow me, We can talk to campus security. Call security. My stomach clenched. But if I do, I imagined her face when security confronted her. But then I remembered the look in his eyes tonight, that sparkle in his eyes when I told him he couldn't take anything else away from me. Maybe for the first time she was the one who was afraid. Address me. Yeah. Professor Ellis nodded. Good. He pulled out his phone and started dialing while talking to someone on the other end. I looked at my hands. They were no longer shaking. For the first time in my life, someone was on my side. And I was allowing myself to accept it. The sun had not yet risen when the campus security officer arrived at Professor Ellis's office. He was a tall man with a serious expression, with a radio clipped to his belt and a notepad in his hand. Chelsea, he said in a firm but not hostile tone, Professor Ellis has filled me in on the situation. Could you tell me exactly what happened? I wasn't used to the adults in my life asking me for my side of the story. I took a deep breath. My mother has been staying with me in the bedroom. At first I thought it would be temporary, but it has been staying longer and longer. Control everything I do. He humiliates me in public. She ridicules me in front of my roommates. My voice broke. Last night, he cut my hair again. And I looked at my hands. I took revenge. I cut his while he was sleeping. The officer took notes without interrupting me. I understand, he said when I finished. Tell me something, Chelsea. Is she registered as someone authorized to be on campus? I shook my head. Has he threatened or physically attacked you? I thought about the slap last night. He hit me when he saw what I did to him. That seemed to catch his attention. Have there been other occasions? I didn't stop. I mean, he's never hit me often, but he's done things to me. He has punished me in cruel ways. It has controlled me my entire life. The officer exchanged a look with Professor Ellis. I'm going to be honest with you, Chelsea. This is very serious. Your mother has no right to be on campus without authorization. If there is also a history of abuse, we can proceed with a restraining order. The words restraining order hung in the air like a possibility I had never considered real. Does that mean you can't get close to me? Exactly. But we need a formal report. Are you willing to present it? My first reaction was to doubt. Not because I wanted to protect her, but because I was taught my entire life not to challenge her. But he had already done it. And if I didn't finish what I started, I would find myself trapped in his control again. Yes, I said. The officer nodded and handed me a form. Complete this with as many details as you can remember. I would also recommend that you speak to the Student Welfare Department. If you want, we can accompany you right now. I nodded. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the Student Welfare Coordinator's office. She was a middle-aged woman, with thick glasses and a professional appearance. He listened attentively to my story as he flipped through the safety report. Chelsea, he said when I finished. First of all, I want to tell you that what you have experienced is not normal. It's abuse. And you've been incredibly strong coming here. I looked down. I don't feel strong. You are, he stated. And now, our job is to make sure you're safe. He crossed his hands on his desk. We have made the decision to grant you a separate bedroom starting today. You will no longer have to share a room with your mother or anyone else. I blinked. Really? Yeah. And as for the restraining order, we can file it today. If approved, your mother will not be able to approach or contact you. It was too much. It was what he had always wanted. Thank you, I said quietly. The coordinator smiled. You don't have to thank us for doing the right thing. When I left the office, the officer walked me back to the bedroom to collect my things. My mother was still there. But this time, he didn't have the power. When he saw us enter, he jumped to his feet. His face was still marked by the mess of his cut hair. What is this? He demanded, looking at the officer. Ma'am, he said in a professional tone, Chelsea has requested to be moved to another bedroom. Additionally, we are currently filing a restraining order against him. My mother's eyes widened. A restraining order? Yeah. From now on, you will not be able to approach her on campus or contact her in any way. My mother let out an incredulous laugh. This is ridiculous. It's my daughter. And your daughter has the right to be safe, the officer responded. My mother's jaw tightened. He looked at me with something I didn't immediately recognize. It wasn't fury. It wasn't anger. It was fear. For the first time, she understood what it felt like to not be in control. I picked up my bags without saying a word. As I passed her, her lips parted. "Chelsea." His voice sounded lower, almost a whisper. I didn't stop. I didn't look at her. When I walked through the door and felt the fresh air on my face, something inside me changed. I was free. The new dormitory was empty when I arrived. There were no messy beds or muffled laughter between roommates. There were no awkward looks when my mother ridiculed me in front of everyone. Just me. Just silence. I closed the door carefully and dropped my bags on the floor. It was the first time in my life that I had a space just for myself. My footsteps echoed in the room as I walked towards the bed. I sat down on the fur mattress and looked around. It was small, but it was mine. The emptiness felt strange. Almost unnatural. I spent so much time getting used to my mother's presence, to her voice piercing my every thought, that silence was something unfamiliar. I took out my phone and looked at the screen. There were no calls from her. No message. He still didn't give up. I knew it. But he couldn't reach me so easily anymore. I fell back onto the bed, feeling the hardness of the mattress beneath me. I closed my eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. I'm alone. I'm safe. The feeling was terrifying and liberating at the same time. Hours later, when hunger brought me out of my lethargy, I decided to go out. I didn't want to be stuck in the room, feeling like a stranger in my own life. The dining hall was filled with students, many of them in lively groups. I didn't have friends here. I had never allowed myself to do them. Too scared. Too much control. I grabbed a tray of food and looked for an empty table. While I was eating, I felt eyes on me. I knew what they saw. The bald girl who came to campus with a domineering mother and was now alone. I didn't care. Or at least, I tried not to care. That's when someone sat in front of me. Chelsea? I looked up. She was a girl with dark skin and short hair, with curious eyes but without a trace of mockery. Yes, I answered cautiously. I'm ABA. We are in the same history class. I didn't remember her, but I nodded. I heard what happened. About your mother, he said quietly. My stomach tightened. I don't want to talk about that. ABA raised his hands in a sign of peace. All right. I just wanted to tell you that what you did was brave. Not many people can walk away from someone like that. His tone was genuine. There was no pity in his gaze. Only understanding. I didn't know what to answer. If you ever want company, I usually sit at the table over there, he pointed out to a group of students who were laughing between bites of food. It's not a forced invitation or anything. Only if you want. I nodded slowly. Thank you. ABA smiled and stood up with her tray. I watched her join her friends, feeling strangely bewildered. For the first time, someone offered me friendship without conditions. Maybe one day I would accept. That night, when I returned to my bedroom, I stopped in front of the mirror. My reflection looked back at me. I stroked my head, feeling the smooth skin under my fingers. He could let it grow now. The thought shook me. I took off my sweatshirt and looked at my own body closely. It was not a weak body. She wasn't a broken girl. It was someone who had survived. And someone who, for the first time, had the power to decide what to do with his life. The days passed in a strange calm. I didn't receive calls from my mother. There were no messages demanding he return home. And yet, every time my phone vibrated, my heart skipped a beat. She had grown accustomed to living in his shadow, waiting for his next move. Now that he was gone, the feeling of emptiness was unsettling. The student welfare department recommended that I attend therapy. The idea made me uncomfortable. Talking to someone about my life meant facing it. But when Professor Ellis mentioned that it could be useful, I decided to give it a try. That's how I met Dr. Rivas. He was an older man, about 50 years old, with a calm voice and a patient air. In our first session, he just let me talk. Tell me about your mother, he said after a few minutes of silence. I ran my hand over my head. An unconscious gesture. She's controlling. It always has been. How? He decided everything about my life. What I wore, what I ate. Even how I should look. I paused. He never let me have hair. Dr. Rivas raised an eyebrow. Never? No. I always shaved it since I was a child. He wrote something down in his notebook. That's not normal, Chelsea. The phrase hit me. I knew it. I had always known it. But hearing someone else say it out loud made it real. Did he punish you when you tried to oppose him? Always. My throat tightened. He used what mattered most to me against me. If I refused to do something, he took away my food, my money, my dignity. The images came back to me. My torn homework in elementary school, the destroyed sanitary pads in high school, my college admission letter nearly torn open in front of me. Chelsea, Dr. Rivas said softly, this wasn't just control. It was severe psychological abuse. My skin crawled. I know it's hard to see it like this, he continued, but I want you to understand something. You didn't deserve anything he did to you. I felt a lump in my throat. But she's my mother. That doesn't make her any less abusive. I looked down. If you grow up in an environment where abuse is the norm, you end up believing that it is normal. But it's not, Chels. It wasn't normal or right. My fingers curled into a fist in my lap. How do I stop feeling like everything is my fault? It's not going to be easy. But it starts here with this, recognizing the truth. I left Dr. Rivas's office feeling dazed. I had never allowed myself to call my mother abusive. But now the word was there, floating in my mind. And it made sense. That night, when I looked in the mirror, I saw myself differently. I wasn't the broken girl my mother had molded. He was someone who was starting to rebuild himself. The next day, I went to the nearest pharmacy and bought a small bottle of shampoo. It was the first time in my life that I had my own. I held it in my hands for a moment, feeling the weight of what it meant. I'm going to let it grow. And this time, no one could stop me. The first few days, I would run my hand over my head and feel the rough texture of the fuzz growing. At first, it made me uncomfortable. It was strange, as if my own body was getting used to the freedom. But little by little, I began to expect it. One afternoon, as I was reviewing my notes in the dining room, a tray slid in front of me. Is this seat occupied? I looked up. It was ABA. I hesitated for a second, but then shook my head. Yes now, he said with a smile, settling down in front of me. I didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to company without a hidden agenda. How are you doing with everything? He asked while breaking a piece of bread. It took me a moment to respond. Down. ABA raised an eyebrow. Strange good or strange bad? A little of both. She nodded, as if she understood without him having to explain. Well, I guess a big change is never easy. He took a sip of his juice and then smiled sideways. Hey, I know this is a little sudden, but some friends and I are going to have a movie marathon tonight. Do you want to come? The question took me by surprise. I wasn't the kind of person who received invitations. You don't have to stay long if you don't want to, he added quickly. But I thought it would do you good to get out of your bedroom for a while. Part of me wanted to reject her immediately. Friendships had always been a dangerous luxury. But something about the way he said it, without pressuring me, without expecting anything in return, made me hesitate. Okay, I said before my fear could change my mind. ABA smiled. Brilliant. We'll pick you up at 8. That night, when they came looking for me, I was about to back out. But I reminded myself that this was part of learning to truly live. ABA's room was filled with cushions and blankets scattered on the floor. There were at least 5 other people, all laughing and talking confidently. I felt out of place, but no one looked at me strangely. Nobody asked about my past. They only offered me a plate of popcorn and made room for me on the couch. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to laugh. It was a small, shy laugh. But it was real. After the third movie, the rest of the group had fallen asleep on the floor. Only ABA and I were still awake, wrapped in blankets, with the light from the television illuminating the room. No. ABA said softly, I never asked you why your mother was like that to you. I felt that the question hung in the air as something inevitable. I took a breath. Because I believed that if I became weak, he could control me. ABA looked at me silently, giving me the space to continue. He was always worried that I would attract the wrong attention. He told me that successful women didn't need beauty, only obedience. I let out a dry laugh. And the worst thing is that it wasn't even about me. It all had to do with her insecurities. ABA nodded slowly. Well, I'm glad you're here, he said after a moment. And that you are finding your own way. I looked at her out of the corner of my eye. No one had ever said anything like that about me. Thank you, I whispered. And for the first time I meant it. I realized that I was surrounded by people who did not want to control or humiliate me. They just wanted to share a moment. It was something new. And I liked it. When I returned to my bedroom that night, I looked in the mirror and noticed something different. My hair was barely growing, but I looked different. Maybe I was finally starting to become someone new. It had been weeks since I filed the restraining order. Weeks of silence. At first, my mother's absence kept me alert. I expected him to reappear somehow, to try to contact me with an excuse or a new trick. But the days passed, and there was no sign of her. Little by little, I began to breathe easier. I got used to my new routines, to the afternoons in the library, to the conversations with ABA and her group, to the strange but pleasant feeling of building a life of my own. Until one afternoon, she appeared. I didn't see it at first. I was leaving the library building when I felt a chill run down my spine. A dark feeling, like an invisible shadow sliding over me. Then I saw her, standing by the campus fountain, wearing a beige coat and dark glasses. My mother. My body reacted before my mind. I stood completely still. My breathing became shallow. Fear was a reflex, a conditioning. But then I remembered something. I wasn't the same girl she could beat. I clenched my fists and forced myself to take a step forward. Then another. When my mother saw me, she slowly took off her glasses and smiled. Chelsea. Hearing my name in his voice made my stomach turn. You shouldn't be here, I said, surprising myself with the firmness of my tone. She tilted her head with the same condescending expression as always. Please don't exaggerate. I just wanted to see you. You have a restraining order, I reminded him. His lips curved into a fake smile. Do you really think you can keep me away forever? I am your mother. His voice was softer than I expected. Too soft. I've changed, Chelsea, he continued. All this has made me reflect. I have realized that I made mistakes. A bitter laugh formed in my throat. Errors? Is that what you call it? My mother sighed dramatically. You were always so exaggerated. You know I only wanted the best for you. The same manipulation as always. But this time it didn't work. No, I said quietly. You didn't do anything for my good. You just wanted to control me. His jaw tightened. Chelsea, I raised you. I gave you everything. And this is how you pay me? There was his true face, barely hidden under the mask of regret. What do you want? I asked bluntly. My mother blinked, surprised. I want us to be family again. Family? I laughed humorlessly. Since when were we a family? His face hardened. You're still a spoiled girl. There was the woman I knew. And I wasn't going to fall for his game. If you don't leave now, I'll call security. His expression changed in an instant. Are you going to do that to your own mother? You taught me how to do this. My mother was speechless. For the first time, I didn't have a quick answer. I held her gaze, waiting until, finally, she was the one to back away. He adjusted his sunglasses, looked at me with contempt, and then turned around. I saw her walk away. And this time, I didn't feel afraid. After meeting my mother, something changed inside me. I realized that although I had managed to get away from her, she still had an invisible chain attached to her control. Money. The truth was simple and terrifying. I was still dependent on her financially. My scholarship covered part of my studies, but my mother still had access to my bank account. He could close it whenever he wanted, leave me with nothing, and I would do it. Sooner or later he would. I couldn't admit it. So that same night, while my classmates were talking about plans for the weekend, I looked for a job. The campus had a virtual board of student offerings. Coffee shops, libraries, tutoring centers. I sent requests to everyone. Anything was better than continuing to depend on my mother. The next morning, I received an email. I had landed an interview at a coffee shop near campus. I showed up nervously, wearing the most formal clothes I had. The manager was a man of about 40 years old, with a tired but friendly expression. You have no experience in coffee shops, he said, reviewing my application. No, I admitted, but I learn quickly. He looked at me over his glasses. Why do you want this job? It was the typical interview question, but for me it was something deeper. Because I want to be independent. There was a brief silence. Then, he nodded. I like people who are motivated. He explained the job to me. Taking orders, handling the cashier, cleaning the tables. Flexible hours. I pay enough to cover my expenses. You start on Monday. I left the interview feeling light, as if I had taken another step towards my freedom. My first day was a disaster. I spilled coffee on the counter, mixed up orders, and received impatient looks from customers. But I didn't give up. Day after day I improved. I learned to prepare espressos, to take orders quickly, to handle pressure. And when I received my first payment, something inside me changed. It was my money. Nobody could take it away from me. That same night, I went to the bank and opened a new account, separate from my mother's. My money. My control. When I left the bank, I checked my reflection in a store window. My hair was already long enough to feel soft to the touch. It was growing. Just like me. Fall had given way to winter when I finally realized how much had changed. My routine no longer felt like a constant struggle to survive. I woke up early. I went to class without feeling the pressure of 1,000 eyes judging me. I worked in the cafeteria without the nervous anxiety of my first days. And most importantly, no one controlled me. I no longer had to look at the phone in fear, waiting for a message from my mother. I didn't worry about what she might take from me, because she no longer had anything she could use against me. One night, after finishing my shift at the cafeteria, I walked back to the dorm with ABA. Snow covered the roads, reflecting the light of the lanterns. How do you feel? ABA asked, putting his hands in his coat pockets. Fine, I responded without thinking. She looked at me out of the corner of her eye, smiling. Fine as in, I don't want to talk about it, or fine as in, are you really fine? I stopped for a second to consider his question. Fine, was the automatic response he used to avoid awkward conversations. But this time, I'm really fine. ABA smiled wider. That's what I wanted to hear. We continue walking in silence. But inside me something felt different. I hadn't realized it until now, but for the first time in my life, my happiness didn't depend on someone else. When I got to my bedroom, I took off my coat and went to the bathroom to take a hot shower. Steam filled the space and fogged the mirror. When I finished, I ran the towel over my face and, out of habit, raised my hand to my head. My fingers did not touch smooth skin. They found something else. Hair. I stayed still. I walked slowly to the mirror and wiped it with the palm of my hand. The image that the reflection returned to me took my breath away. I had forgotten how long it had been since I last checked my appearance. He always avoided looking at me too much. The reflection in the mirror used to be a confirmation of what my mother wanted me to be. But now, my hair was already long enough to be soft to the touch. They were not defined waves. It wasn't a drastic change. But he had grown enough to notice. To know it was there. A few months ago, I never imagined seeing this in the mirror. It wasn't much. Just a couple of centimeters. But it was there. And the strangest thing was that it fit me well. I touched the strands with my fingertips, feeling their softness. It didn't seem real. Everything in my life had been dictated by my mother's presence. From what I wore to the way I should look. But this was completely mine. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my robe, my wet hair falling in disarray. I had never had the opportunity to see my own growth. I had never been able to imagine what I would look like over time. Simply letting my hair grow was an act of rebellion. But it was also an act of self-love. I grabbed my phone and searched online, how to care for growing hair. I read articles. I watched videos. I absorbed information. I wanted to do it well. I wanted to do it for me. The next day, I went with ABA to a hair product store. This is important, he said as we walked through the hallways. You're going to need a good shampoo and cream to define those curls when they come out. How do you know they will be curls? I asked, looking at the bottles on the shelf. ABA smiled. Because the little hair you have is already curling at the ends. I put a hand to my head, surprised. I had never had enough hair to notice its natural texture. Good. So, give me recommendations. ABA helped me choose the best for my hair type. When we left the store, the cold hit my face, but I barely felt it. I stopped in front of the window and looked at myself in the reflection of the window. The Chelsea of a few months ago would never have imagined this moment. The Chelsea of old would have been ashamed to be there. He would have been afraid of attracting attention. But Chelsea looked different now. It felt different. And the best of all was that I liked what I saw. Winter gave way to spring, and with it, something in me also blossomed. The routine that was once a daily struggle became a part of my life. I studied, worked in the cafeteria, hung out with ABA and his group. For the first time, I had a normal life. And it was completely mine. There were days when I still felt the shadow of the past. Little doubts that tried to sneak into my mind. Had I really escaped from my mother? Or was I just experiencing a pause before she came back to claim me? But the difference was that now I had tools to confront those thoughts. Dr. Rivas helped me understand something fundamental. My mother no longer had power over me. He would only have it if I allowed him to. The first time they caught her hanging around campus, they let her go with a warning. The second time, she tried to approach me in the cafeteria, but ABA saw her before me and alerted security. Now it was clear that he wasn't going to stop. The final confirmation came on an unexpected afternoon. I was in the cafeteria, finishing my shift, when I saw a couple of security officers on the television hanging on the wall. Something about the image looked familiar. I turned up the volume and felt a chill run down my spine. It was my mother. The news reported that she had been arrested for violating the restraining order for the third time. I took a deep breath. Part of me expected to feel afraid. But the only thing I felt was relief. Not because he wanted to see her suffer, but because the consequences had finally reached someone who had always believed he was above them. The next morning, I received a message from my father. I didn't think about my father very often. He had always been a spectator in my life. I remembered when I was a little girl and I clung to his arm, begging him to defend me. "Don't get involved," he told me in a low voice, looking askance at my mother as if she were a force of nature that no one could stop. He never hit me. He never yelled at me. But he also didn't do anything to stop what she did to me. Maybe he was as trapped in his world as I was in mine. Maybe he was just a coward. "I'm sorry for everything that happened. I didn't know how to stop her. I just want you to be okay." I didn't answer. Maybe one day I would. But not today. Today was my birthday. 19 years old. I spent them with ABA and the rest of my friends in a small gathering in my dorm. We ate cake, played cards and laughed until we were breathless. And when everyone left, I was left alone, sitting on the bed, looking at my reflection in the mirror. My hair was already long enough to take shape. But what caught my attention the most was not that. It was my expression. There was no longer a trace of fear in my eyes. There was no trace of the girl who once begged for permission to be herself. The Chelsea I saw in the mirror was strong. I was free. And his life, finally, was about to begin.